On today's episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, my film review is Deerskin from 2019, followed by my segment Allow Me to Explain. And it all starts right now. This is Jordan Ramirez, and you are listening to Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. And now, here is my latest film review. My film review for this episode is Deerskin, released in 2019, directed by Quentin Dupieux, starring Jean Dujardin, Adèle Haenel, Albert Delpy, and Coralie Roussier. Here is the synopsis of the film. Georges, played by Jean Dujardin, is separated from his wife and ends up buying a deerskin jacket from an individual played by Albert Delpy, who puts out the advertisement in the paper. Once Georges takes the deerskin jacket from that said individual and does not have enough money to pay for the deerskin jacket, the individual decides to give him a digital video camera as a bonus. Georges then stays at a bed and breakfast hotel since he has nowhere else to stay. While he stays at the bed and breakfast hotel for 1 month, he toys around with the camera, filming whatever he could film. He later goes to a bar and meets Denise, played by Adèle Haenel. Georges tells her that he is a filmmaker who is making a feature film as his occupation, even though he is actually a nobody. Denise tells Georges that even though she works as a waitress, she also edits films as a hobby. So Georges ends up giving her a job of editing his little film. While Georges is starting to make his film with a digital video camera, he becomes so obsessed with his deerskin jacket that he has only one goal: to be the only person wearing a jacket. And the only way to achieve his goal is to make sure that no one else is alive and to dispose of their jackets. So what do I think of this film? It is one of the films that I wanted to watch since I got to watch the trailer and I was hooked on it. And also from John Waters' review back in 2020 as one of his top 10 favorite films of that year. His description of the film went, quote, "The fashion film of the year. A man becomes so fixated on a fringe jacket he finds in a thrift store that he sets out to kill every other person in the whole world who might dare to imitate his new signature look." The film, as I saw it, is not a parody or a satire. It is just an absurdist dark comedy about a man who is obsessed with a deerskin jacket, that he also gets the shoes, hat, pants, and gloves made of real deerskin, that he becomes more and more like a fringe frontiersman who would do anything to be fashionable. Dupieux's world is so out there that one would think of it as a straightforward slasher film, but the absurdity in that Georges is not interested in the victims of who he has killed, but instead he is more focused on their jackets. I have previously talked about Dupieux's other film, Mandibles, from 2020 on my previous mini-sode of the podcast. What I like about this film is the outrageousness and the absurdity of the fact that Georges' obsession with his jacket and not allowing anyone else to wear their own jackets feels more like a flat-out subverted technique often found in movies focused entirely on loners who become obsessed and crazed. Jean Dujardin is believable as Georges, who is a mystery in the film. Georges is someone whose occupation is abstracted or vague since we, the audience, do not know what he does for a living. We know that he is separated from his wife, who is unseen in the film, except through a phone call that he makes. My favorite line is when his wife summarizes who Georges is on the phone call. "You are nowhere, Georges. You do not even exist." His character, as I watch his performance, undergoes a massive transformation as emphasized by the jacket that he wears throughout the film. In the opening, he is wearing a regular jacket. As soon as he is pumping gas in his car, he looks at himself in the car window, and in the next scene, he takes off that jacket and tosses it in the toilet and flushes it until it's all clogged. When he wears the deerskin jacket, it gives him a new identity, and he sets a goal of what he wants to pursue. With the aid of his camera, he also talks to the deerskin jacket through the camera and films it as if it were the main star of the film. There are some scenes in the film involving Georges talking to that deerskin jacket in his own voice as if it were speaking to him. In a way, it is both disturbing and pretty comical to watch. Denise is another character who is fascinating to watch in this film, played by Adèle Haenel. Denise, like Georges, is a loner in this film, since she has no other relative or friend whom she can talk to or be friends with. Denise doesn't have that much of a backstory or any information about her past, since I think of her as the only character who was the most serious or sympathetic in the film. Hanel, in her performance, is able to play the role very seriously, while I also imagine that she had a lot of fun making this film that was not meant to be serious, but mostly comedic. When Denise gets the job as the editor for Georges' film, at first it starts out as a bunch of random shots that is focused entirely on his jacket. She later receives more footage from Georges killing his victims on camera that she is now completely hooked on what he is doing. The more that Georges shoots on his digital camera for his film, the more that Denise is now starting to take charge of the project, as she is now handling money matters for this project. The long takes of Georges when he is either driving out in his car or the beautiful scenic landscapes and the usage of the wide shots are fantastic to watch. Depew has an eye for what he wants in his cinematic vision and style that stands out in his work. It is also especially great to watch for the color palette in this film, from Georges' costume that is shown in shades of light or dark brown, mostly beige, coming from his deerskin jacket and clothing, or the other examples of showing great color palettes in this film that takes place outside of a movie theater. When Georges is prepared to take out his victims, the light color is bright red/pink neon to emphasize the mood of the murder sequence. There are also touches of bright saturated colors in the victims' jackets that are shown throughout the film, such as pink, green, blue, red, etc. Everything else in the film is amazing to watch and listen to as well, from the musical score by Janko Nilovic to the practical effects by Olivier Afonso of the victim's death on screen. I absolutely had a blast watching this amazingly offbeat dark comedy that is outside the mainstream. The genesis of Deerskin for the director originated when he wrote the script in English for an American actor whom he knew. It stayed with Depew and he felt that it was missing something, so he rewrote it entirely in French. The more he rewrote the script, the more honed and well-crafted the story became as it evolved into the film Deerskin. Depew called this film about gentle madness and mostly about freedom. What do we do with our freedom? Depew said in an interview that when he wanted to make this film in French and wanted to create a world of solitude and a no man's land in France, and the zone that he did not know existed was what ended up in the final film. Depew recalled the crucial element that is important to the film, the deerskin jacket. To define the tone of everything else, we had to start with the jacket. We tried 10 or 12 and this one was the best. It's almost perfect. You can see it's too short, but he doesn't look stupid. We were having fun because Jean was slowly becoming obsessed with the jacket himself and he was looking good in it. In an interview with cineuropa.org, when he was asked about Georges, who films himself with a camcorder, he said that he had no desire to philosophize, but that it brings him pleasure. It certainly reminds me of my beginnings when I was 14 years old, of my first emotions as a video maker. In my opinion, that's the only reason. I need to be connected to childhood and the roots of my desires. I'm extremely terrified of becoming a boring adult. I love knowing that I'm telling a story about things that I know. When I give this character a camera, it's a way of staying very strongly connected to him, a way of loving him, of being close to him, of understanding him, of being in a small world that I know well. There is no film within the film, because we evoke the possibility of a film but we don't see it. Cinema that tells about cinema is a rather boring topic, and I'm trying to avoid this idea of a film within a film a little bit, because for me, the camera in this film in that context is a bit of a gadget. The character of Denise, as Depew stated, quote, "She was written as an absolutely normal girl. She was nice and a bit naive, and she wanted to get out of this boring bartender life. She was passionate about editing, and that was it." However, when Hanel was brought on board, quote, "She took the character to another level. But then when we started working together, Hanel told me, I want this character to be as crazy as Georges. And she did it without changing a single line of dialogue. It was in the way she played it. You can tell in her eyes that she is crazy," end quote. Regarding Dujardin's performance in the film as Georges, Depew said, quote, "We both wanted the same film, a realistic one, with all the effects erased. All that we wanted with Jean was to remain at ground level, in reality for things to appear real. We put all the sliders down for it all to be a bit neutral, real, his rendering of the character a little muted, for things to look neither forced nor far-fetched. It wasn't about creating a performance. Here it was the opposite. It was finding excellence in nothingness. in The Actor Who Doesn't Act. It was complicated, but because Jean is gifted in this field, it was very easy to obtain, end quote. When it came to Adèle Haenel's working relationship with Jean Dujardin in the film, Dupuis said, quote, "He was scared when she wasn't available to him when we were shooting, which was honestly a genius move because this is how we created the vibe that you see in the movie. They're not two friends pretending to be characters, they are characters. They didn't know each other then and still don't. We shot for 5 weeks and they didn't become friends," end quote. The film premiered at the Cannes Film Festival on May 15, 2019 in France. It was later released in France on June 19, 2019. The film made its US premiere at the AFI Fest on November 16, 2019. It was later released on the internet in the US on May 1, 2020. The film received mixed to positive reviews from critics. I love this film. It is one of the films that I had on my watch list of films that I was hooked on from the trailer and its premise. After watching this movie, I admired the style and tone of the story, and from the director's offbeat environment of the world that he has created. I mentioned before that I have reviewed his other film Mandibles in my previous podcast episode, so now I have reviewed another one of his films. I would give great praise to its cast and their performances, the direction, writing, and cinematography by Quentin Dupieux, the score, production design, costuming, and its special effects. I hope that you will enjoy this film as much as I did. We will be right back with my segment, Allow Me to Explain. Early this month, the Writers Guild of America went on strike, and now because of the writers' strike, Hollywood film and television productions are now at a standstill. So how did this begin, and what will the outcome look like? It's time for Allow Me to Explain. The writers' strike began on May 2nd, just after the negotiations between the WGA and the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers failed to reach an agreement. This is the most recent strike in Hollywood since 2007 to 2008. So, the questions that are discussed about the writers' strike are, what are the issues? And why did it get started? What were the offers between the AMPTP and WGA? And will there be a resolution sometime soon? What were the issues that were sticking out that led to the writers' strike? The issues that were focused in the negotiations between the WGA and the AMPTP were its working conditions, job security, and its wage increases. For the job security, the WGA and the AMPTP could not reach an agreement because of the current working payment that has been stifled by the rise of streaming platforms that has been known as the gig economy. For the screenwriters living in Los Angeles and Hollywood, the ability to find a stable life has become impossible for them to live in due to the rise in income and uncertainty for their finances. Under the previous model for television production, a television program would operate under the model of 22 episodes for a season, and each writer of that production were paid per episode on that show. Now, under the new model for streaming shows, it has now been halved by 6 to 13 episodes. In the negotiations between the WGA and the AMPTP, the Guild stated that writers working on streaming shows getting half the opportunity on a per-episode basis has led to ask for a stronger compensation for their members. An example of why they need stronger compensation comes from certain shows like The Mandalorian or Loki that last longer, and it would mean that the writers on those shows would have to make their pay last longer before they work on that project and cannot move on to another job for the next gig. Also in the negotiations were higher minimum wage payment for their members, better pension/healthcare payments, set pay rate for screenwriters working on streaming films or theatrical releases, and to abandon the method of mini rooms, which is a small group of writers working on a short time before production even begins. Another sticking point during the negotiations was the rise of AI, artificial intelligence. The WGA made a demand to the AMPTP that AI must be regulated on all projects, film or television, covered by the MBA, the Minimum Basic Agreement, from the AMPTP. It also includes the agreement that AI must not be used to write or rewrite literary material or as a source, and that AI cannot be trained by any MBA-covered material. The AMPTP rejected this proposal with their counteroffer that stated, quote, annual meetings to discuss advancements in technology, end quote. WGA Negotiating Committee member / screenwriter John August mentioned that the reckless use of AI threatens the WGA's control over writing credits. He stated, quote, ChatGPT can't write a good screenplay, but it can write kind of a passable scene, and it's got to have an impact on how we do our jobs, end quote. On the positive side, a number of unions such as the Directors Guild of America, International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the Animation Guild IATSE, and SAG-AFTRA, as well as television and film actors, have expressed their support in the writer's strike and helping them picket to fight for the cause. So now the question is, with a number of television and film productions affected by the writer's strike, will there be a resolution to end this strike? The answer to that question remains uncertain, since the issues that I have mentioned will last for months. Tom Noonan, former network executive and founder of Bullseye Entertainment, stated that the only way to end this strike is if the streaming networks agree to a residual system for the writers, but that studios do not want streamers to open their books and share how they measure their data. Quote, they don't want writers of guilds to be able to stick their noses into their business and say, hey, my show just got 1 billion views, don't you think I deserve a raise or a bonus or something? They don't want to create that precedent. There are hundreds of shows that are being produced now versus dozens every year. That's going to require a tremendous amount of accounting and transparency that the streamers just don't even want to touch. I think there's a world where they could reward writers by the number of episodes. Maybe they get a bonus from that, or the number of years that the show is on the platform. But I don't think they're going to want to get into that performance, end quote. This has been Allow Me to Explain. On the next episode of Film Talk with Jordi Ramirez, it's a Jordi Ramirez minisode. Jordi Ramirez recommends the horror fantasy Unicorn Wars from 2023, directed by Alberto Vasquez, airing this Monday at 12 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Radio Public. You have been listening to Film Talk with Jordi Ramirez. This series is now available to listen to at 4 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Radio Public every Friday. And my minisodes, Jordi Ramirez recommends every Monday at 12 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Radio Public. And just as a reminder to make sure to like and subscribe to my podcast on Spotify. Make sure to go to my blog website at filmtalkwithjordiramirizpodcast.wordpress.com with my latest podcast episode on the page labeled Episodes. You can contact me on my social media feeds such as LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. I am also available on Letterboxd. Check out my YouTube channel as well, Film Talk with Jordi Ramirez, and please make sure to like and subscribe. If there is a film that you recommend that I would put for my next review, make sure to submit it to my social media accounts or on the YouTube channel. And until then, I'll see you at the movies.